Now you're very welcome along to the Huddle Breakdown. Enda here with you in the company of Jico James and Alan Morrison, as always. And today on the show, just like last week, we're going to be going word for word through Ange Postecoglou's press conference to see if he dropped any more hints as to his future at Celtic Football Club. He looks to be on the way out the door. He looks to be staying at the club for the next 15 years. Who the hell knows at this point whether or not we're going to have a manager after the Scottish Cup final this weekend? But we'll do our best to dissect what he was, where he was looking, and what he was saying, and give our honest and expert opinions on whether or not Ange Postecoglou is going to be Tottenham's next manager. Al Morrison, I'll let you go first. I mean, he said that somebody else was the favorite last week. He said that there were other people that were asked about this job, and he said basically everything that we would expect him to say. He didn't say anything different to last week. It's still the same story. And yet, if you look at the Scottish media in particular, you'd think that Ange said cheerio, sayonara, and good luck.
Yeah, I mean, listen, we know there's the usual games afoot, right? So the Scottish press are milking this for all it's worth. It's a run up to a cup final. It's negative news for Celtic fans. Therefore, it's just like yes, it's all their prayers have been answered in that respect. And a couple, as I say, a couple of people who are based in London have been on to various platforms that have been on saying that it's a very different message coming out of London media in terms of Tottenham are looking at a number of candidates, etc. So what I will say is, just from my own network, there's a lot of chatter, a lot of quite consistent, from different sources, more or less saying that they do want to speak to Ange, and Ange wants to speak to them. But now that is probably perfectly normal. I'm sure Tottenham are going to speak to a number of candidates, and Ange would be not being true to himself if he didn't speak to them, because any player of his where a big club was interested, he would encourage them to at least have the conversation for their own, well-being, for their own careers, for their own, families, etc. So I've got no doubt that if it comes to it, Andrew will speak to them. Now, what then happens if that happens? What then happens after that? We can't possibly say. What I will say is that is from Daniel Levy's perspective, I imagine there's an awful lot about Ange Postecoglou that is very attractive to him, and it's the same reasons that he was attractive to Desmond. Number one is he's cheap, right? He's only going to cost a year's compensation, as far as we understand the sort of the way that the rolling contract works. Second is we know we don't know, but we can probably surmise that what Ange won't do in that situation is go to Daniel Levy. Look, you need to give me £500 million like Chelsea for me to rebuild your squad. That's just not how he operates, and that's not and that's not the answer that Daniel Levy would want. And thirdly, like his time with Celtic, he wouldn't be demanding to completely gut the whole of the Tottenham football operations and hire a load of mates from Australia. He would be quite happy just to walk down the road himself and turn up for work and get on with what he's got. All those things make, to someone like Daniel Levy, make Ange Postecoglou a very attractive candidate. However, if they do have talks, there's an awful lot of things that would need to be resolved. Levy would need to like Ange and to think he fits the culture and have confidence that Ange can deal with multimillionaire, high-profile football players, and somebody who's got no history of buying multi-million, tens of million-pound players on huge contracts, and you have to satisfy himself with that. And similarly, we know that Ange is if he doesn't like what he's hearing or doesn't feel comfortable, as much as I completely agree with what James said last week, that so generational income and money for his family to set them up beyond their grandchildren's grandchildren is always going to be a huge draw. I don't get the feeling that Ange is somebody that would walk into something he didn't feel 100% he could get behind, especially when he knows that he's very comfortable and in all respects, monetary and professionally, in a job that he's already got. So there's an awful lot of things to go through before we start sort of having the conversation about what happens next. But I would be astonished if at least there wasn't the conversation had after the Scottish Cup final.
Yeah, so I was very sarcastic in my intro there. So I'll actually do my job now properly and let people know what the story is at this point in time. So Ange is the favorite or one of the favorites. One of the leaders is what is being said for the Tottenham job. He was speaking in the press conference today ahead of the Scottish Cup final. He said that his head is 100% on the game and that this stuff doesn't even register with him at this point in time. Now, Alan, you mentioned the London press, so the London Independent, Miguel Delaney in particular, who is fairly well sourced when it comes to London football clubs, is saying that Tottenham have set a 2 week sort of window for them to appoint their manager. Now, one way to look at that is okay, they're saying 2 weeks. It's going to be next week after the Scottish Cup final, and Tottenham look like they're absolute geniuses who sorted this out in the time frame that they said. But also, the first paragraph in that line says that Ange Postecoglou is one of the leading candidates, as opposed to the leading candidate, which is being reported in the Scottish press. So I would say that he is in talks with Tottenham. I would say that there are other people in talks with Tottenham. And I think that there is a chance that Ange has spoken, will speak, will continue to speak to Tottenham, and may come back thinking, absolutely not. That does not sound appealing to me. Doesn't sound like the job's going to be the right fit for me. And he may not take the job in the same form as Pochettino, Nagelsmann, and even Arne Slot in the last week did to Tottenham. So that's where I think the story stands, James. I don't know if you think the story's moved on any bit since we spoke about this last Friday.
The only two things I've heard that make me more concerned, and again, this is all dependent on the veracity of reporting, which, we all know that that's not necessarily always the case. But, reports that the Celtic board are kind of, I don't know if I saw the word resigned but let's say they're being vigilant about being prepared as far as this scenario. And I wasn't aware of, but apparently Ange's agent has this is reporting, has a relationship with Levy and has been lobbying. That's been, so again, is that true? I don't know, but
well, that's also his job, so he should be doing that.
Well,
anyway.
Right. But the fact that there's actually a relationship there over time would, again, if somebody's going to have, it's different as far as just an agent advocating for the client versus having a long-term relationship with the owner, that where there might actually be a value placed on the person's counsel, that kind of thing. So my dog just turned off my light. So that's what happened. He just laid down on my light and it disconnected it. So that's what just happened there. So yeah, I think those are the two things that on the margins would probably tilt it relative to where it had been, maybe towards these, more likely to leave than otherwise, where it had been a week ago when we talked about it. But again, I agree with all these issues. I mean, until things are finalized and everyone kind of comes to an agreement, as we saw with a certain current Newcastle manager a couple of years ago, that these things can, not come to fruition until they're wrapped up.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about the here and now then, because the last couple of weeks have been a bit shite, let's be honest, for Celtic in terms of the performances. Like the performances have not been great.
It's not very analytical.
Well, I mean, you don't need to be too analytical to label that, but in terms of trophy day, it was not shite. It was very much the opposite of that. Absolutely battered, and the thing that I wonder about though, and if we stick on the Ange story for just 1 second here, Alan, it's enough speculating whether he's going to Tottenham. Let's speculate some more. Do you think that this will impact the Scottish Cup final? Do you think this will have leaked within the dressing room, or the fact that Ange doesn't really go into the dressing room too much? Do you think that might even allow ideas to fester more than they might do if he was in amongst the players?
Possibly a little bit. I mean, the players aren't immune from the influences of the rest of the world, the same as we are. I'm sure they read newspapers or browse newspapers online or whatever they do, and social media and so forth. And given that they, I'm sure, daily talk to their own agents who will hear their own things and are therefore connected to some of the inside world of the industry. I'm sure there's some chatter there, but what Ange has been steadfast to the point of more skillful than any of the politicians in this godforsaken country is that he's just trod that line between being seen to be fully 100% on the job without ruling anything out. He's been brilliant at that, and I'm sure it's the same behind closed doors. Listen, footballers are used to speculation, used to things changing very suddenly. So speculation around a manager or another player is not unusual in any shape or form. So and Ange just had a week of getting everybody on side. I mean, I think we saw that on against Aberdeen that the switch was flicked back to game face, and as much as Aberdeen were arguably on their holidays, although I think again Barry Robson's fighting to make a good impression in 5-0 defeats when you're just into the job doesn't do that against anybody. I didn't detect Aberdeen were too. I think when they started losing the game, I think the heads went a little bit, but I think certainly the first half an hour, 30 minutes, I think they were right in it. Um, but Celtic were obviously back to something like their best in that match. So to me, that says that the focus of the training all week will be similarly, and that there'll be no brooking any sort of slacking in the run up to the final. I mean, it'll be made clear the significance of a treble, the importance of sending the fans home for the summer happy, etc. Your sunny day at Hampden. I mean, who doesn't love the last game of the season when you've got the Scottish Cup to win? So all those things, right? I mean, Ange said them better than I can in his own press conference. So that leads me to believe that there won't be a distraction in that regard. But it
Mm.
doesn't mean to say that people aren't got things in the back of their minds. Of course they do.
Yeah, I'll offer some more analytical opinion on Celtic's 5-0 win against Aberdeen. Look at the starting lineup. That's why they weren't. You didn't come across as sloppy or off the pace or didn't really care. They had the best starting lineup that they could put out given the injury lists. And I mean, like that's what was missing. People were like, why are they playing so badly? Well, it's because we're playing 7 players that would never play together, and will never play together likely in the next couple of months and potentially ever again for Celtic. But Jim's, in terms of like the the installation of the players and whether or not all this speculation is going to come into the dressing room, you can almost even turn this on the head that some players might be like, okay, well, this manager's gone next season, but we still have a trophy to win here to wrap up the treble season. One last trophy for him, one last trophy potentially for some of these players if some of them leave, if Ange leaves. So like there is extra motivation there on the flip side if it is seeping into the dressing room.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if there's any kind of material impact. Um, for all those reasons. And this is a significant occasion. It's not like they're going to be walking into a half-empty stadium, and it's just like running out the clock at the end of the season, so to speak. So this is a big event. It's a final, and so in theory, how do you balance all that stuff out? I mean, who knows? But I'd be shocked. The other part is, good or bad, we're not exactly facing a footballing giant in the final. We can talk about that as far as what Inverness is likely to bring to the table. Intro, it's going to be a lot of long balls. I got to share some stats on that, but they're going to be going along a lot, and again, I think that also is part of what happened with Aberdeen. Is that, and I agree. I mean, it was kind of back to the job at hand almost. But Aberdeen also, did not really deploy the St. Mirren model as we've been talking about for months now. They were quite open, and the amount of space in between their lines, and I mean, it was almost like a shooting gallery for Celtic. So I think it was some of both of those, and I'd be shocked. I mean, if we saw that against Inverness, I mean, if they do that, then Billy Dodds needs his head examined. So, which maybe he does, but who knows? So yeah, I suspect what determines the outcome on Saturday is going to have very little to do with any rumors surrounding Ange.
Okay. Well, let's get into the details then, Alan. The starting lineup that we put out against Aberdeen, I think the most interesting thing from that, outside of Abada getting a rare start for Abada, really, is that Tomoki Iwata started in centre back beside Karl Starfelt. AJ was right back, and then Greg Taylor was left back. What do we make of Iwata as a centre back? Because I think we sort of mooted that he might potentially actually be brought in as a centre back as opposed to a centre midfielder. So as opposed to what he did in midfield during his short stint playing there, what did we make of him further back in the defence?
Yeah, I mean, not really tested. I don't think Aberdeen had never mind a shot on target. I don't think they had a shot. So that's just like ludicrous. So he really wasn't put under much of any pressure at all. Um, the idea, in some ways, Inverness are going to be the perfect opponent. And a lot of it's, some of it's to do with the history. Is if ever Celtic need to not be complacent against a team in a cup tie, it's Inverness, and I think that history is useful in this regard, just in case there is any complacency. But also just the style of play Inverness will deploy. I mean, James mentioned a lot of long balls there. I mean, my understanding is that they actually complete more passes per game than any other team in that championship. Now, that doesn't mean to say they won't play a lot of long balls. Both of those things can be true. But they don't have a big target man. If you're worried about Iwata or Kobayashi being bullied by a big striker, they don't have that. They've got a very clever 34-year-old Billy Mackay, who's knows where the net is, but he's not going to be battering centre halves around all day long. He's going to be looking to play on the shoulder and get in and get chances in the box. So playing Iwata has a lot of utility because if you think about the amount of dominance that Celtic are going to have off the ball, effectively having another ball playing central midfielder in there to bring the ball forward to supplement the middle of the park really will allow you to dominate that area. But I think equally Kobayashi could play that role. He's clearly very comfortable on the ball. The weaknesses that we've seen from him are more around being bullied by big physical players, which I don't think is not Inverness's game. Um, all the traditional underdog strengths that can be brought to bear against playing Celtic, like being great at set pieces, like having a big target man. Inverness don't have any of that. So in that regard, they're almost a great matchup for Celtic, is even allowing for the fact that the sixth best team in what was quite a poor championship. They are just a really good matchup. Not trying to be complacent about this, just really trying to be as cold-hearted as I can in terms of the analysis. I'm struggling to see how they're going to cause Celtic problems other than being very, very dogged in midfield. They've got a decent midfield four who are very hardworking, quite defensively good, and it's going to be the old story of can you break it down? So in terms of, I don't have any sense from Ange of whether it will be Iwata or Kobayashi, but either of them can step forward and are good enough passing to start to help to unblock some of the middle of the field, I think.
So they play a 4-4-2, do they?
It's been
Well, I think.
more
Sorry,
of a
James.
yeah. Again, this is I haven't watched them other than a little bit. We get some championship games on Paramount Plus in the United States on Fridays. So I've seen them a couple of times, but just in looking at their data profile, so they 4-4-1-1 has been kind of
that's no
uh,
good.
right, and then mixing that kind of with a 4-2-3-1 when I think they've been more attacking. So it is quixotic, meaning that Alan's right. They've had the most passes, but this long ball is so again. Having not watched them a lot, I surmising that they probably do a lot of channel passing because they also are an outlier in progressive passes for the league. So I suspect they get the ball and then just kind of pump it forward, maybe not high and long, but long down channels and try and hit people on the break in that way. That's my guess. But just to speak to this, I mean, it really is pretty interesting, at least for me, if you're, a spreadsheet shagger. So the top long ball team in the Premiership is, guess, Enda, I always go to you with these. Who do you think plays the most long balls in the Scottish Premiership?
The Scottish Premiership.
Yeah, this year, this past season.
Oh,
Oh, come on, producer.
let
Just
me
guess.
let me get the table. Let me get the table. Hang on. Okay, I'm going to say it's St. Johnston.
It's Livingston. Okay,
I was going to say Livingston, but
right.
it seemed too obvious. It seemed too obvious it was going to be Livingston.
So they've averaged just over 54 long balls per game. Inverness has averaged 63. Now, what does that mean? Like, how do you all right. So, League Two in England, which is generally a long ball league, their league average this season was 54 and a half. Their highest volume team was Stevenage. Yeah. Not up on my League Two enunciation. Theirs was 60.57. Okay, so they were the longest long ball team in a long ball league, and Inverness was more than them, and a good bit more than anyone else in the Scottish Championship. So, so the fact that this is what's so interesting, is that they don't have a big target man. I think actually they had another striker who scored some. Sunderland or something was his name. He hasn't been playing recently, so I don't know if he got hurt or what. He seemed to be more of the big man, little man combo if they did have that at any point. So like I said, I don't know if he's out injured or just stopped playing for whatever reason, but he had a decent number of goals for them earlier in the season. So yeah, it's an interesting situation. I agree with Alan. It's basically going to be bunker. They'd be nuts not to do that. And then hopefully they tire in the second half, and we've seen this script over and over again. But the other thing is, the way that Scottish football is not earth shattering to anybody, but like the bottom six in the Premiership versus Inverness is not much difference.
No, that's true. That's true.
Yeah,
true.
so Inverness
You're right.
versus
I mean,
St. Johnston, it's not that big a deal.
yeah, and as I say, the top six in the Championship, there weren't many points between them, and they're not going to be that much below the level of the bottom three or four in the Premiership. So let's be clear about that. But I mean, to your point, James, I mean the game. I watched their semi-final against Falkirk. They won 3-0, but actually it was a really even game. But I think where the long balls come in is they're a counter-attacking team, because Falkirk are very much a possession-based team, and Falkirk had a lot of possession. And actually, it was surprising how much space Inverness left, especially in midfield, and so some of those gaps were actually quite big. Falkirk couldn't get the ball in the net, and I think part of Inverness's game was then to get the ball and get it forward quickly, and that's how they caught Falkirk out. And I think they were looking to get their midfielders on. So if they're going to play that game, their midfielders are going to get really tired really quickly if they play that way. So, but it wasn't the case of knocking it up to a big lad. I mean, Billy Mackay, great goal scorer at his level throughout his career. He's 34 now. He's not particularly quick and he's not particularly big, but if the ball comes to him in the box, he's going to get it on target probably. But yeah, it's going to be more that they're a workman-like team, they're a counter-attacking team, but I think it matches up. And as I say, my concern for them is if they're as open as they were in the semi-final, then yeah, that's going to be bad news for them.
So I mean, it's these kind of sticky games that Celtic seem to struggle with, or where the nerves start to creep in. So are we thinking, Alan, it's the best approach from Celtic is just be patient throughout the game, keep possession, and tire Inverness out, or is it go for the throw early and then just sort of try kill the game as much as you can?
I think both those things. I mean, Celtic's propensity will be to start fast and to go at the opposition and to press them and harry them. They know, again, because of the 5 subs, because of the experience in these finals, that probably, Inverness come out, their natural tendency when Inverness come out is the first 20 minutes, their players are going to be giving it absolutely everything. Have they got the emotional energy as much as the physical energy to sustain it? If they go a goal down early, what impact does that have? But equally, as you rightly say, we've seen these types of opposition many, many times before. It isn't beyond the bounds of reason. In fact, it may well be likely that the Inverness first 20 minutes, 30 minutes are dogged, resilient, hardworking, and keep Celtic at bay. And but Celtic, this team has learned to be patient. You don't have to win the game in the first 5 minutes. You can win the game in the 65th minute or the 75th minute, and then spaces start to open up. So that's been, I think, a pretty consistent strength of the Celtic team is they don't panic. They don't panic if they don't get an early goal. They worry about it. They know they've got strength off the bench to come. They can continue to play with intensity. They can continue to press because someone else will come on and take up the slack with 35, 30 minutes to go. So, yeah, it may well be a case of patience, but, you know, what I was most heartened by is, as I say, is you worry about set pieces because that's a big leveler. You worry about somebody being 6'5", that's a big leveler. They're not that kind of team. They're really not. They've got pretty low set piece conversion rate and success rate, even amongst championship teams.
Mm. So one leveler that I always find with the Scottish Cup final is the pitch, because the Hampden pitch is just atrocious. I don't know what the weather's been like in Scotland. It's been really nice in Ireland, so I'm assuming it's similar-ish in Scotland, which means that it definitely shouldn't be as muddy and as slow as normal. But my worry is that it's going to be bobbly, and that's going to cause some sort of hassle with Celtic's passing game. But we'll have to wait and see what it's like before the game for that to come into play. But one of the narratives, I guess, for the last week or the last couple of weeks of the season, really, was that these players are coming in to fight for their place in the team for the Scottish Cup final, James. Bernabé certainly isn't going to be there anyway. Is there anybody that you have seen in the last number of weeks that might be in the starting lineup, or is it going to be the strongest team that Celtic can put out, like the most consistent team across the season, bar Cameron Carter-Vickers, essentially, who's out injured?
Yeah, I guess you would think Maeda would come in for Abada. That would be my guess anyway. Although I wouldn't be shocked if, and I could see the argument for going with Jota and Abada, given the likelihood that they are going to be a bunkered, counter-attacking team. And I'd actually probably argue that Abada would be a better matchup for that, or even Haksabanovic in that regard, because they're not likely to be having the high-end speed that we worry about. And then what Alan said, the other big question will be at center back, Iwata versus Kobayashi. And then theoretically, although he hasn't played much recently, Moy versus O'Reilly, but I suspect it would be O'Reilly. But outside of that, it pretty much picks itself, I think. Although I hadn't heard, what's the latest on Johnston? Is he fit, or?
I presume he is.
And yeah, Johnson's fit.
Okay.
Who else was out? Haksabanovic is fit, but Moy's not fit.
Moy's not. Okay, so that clears that up. So yeah, you center back, and really, the composition of the wings would be the big question. But again, I don't think there's a lot in between any of those decisions, meaning that none of them would make me concerned one way or the other.
Mm. What about you, Alan?
Yeah, I mean, similar. I think in some ways Abada would be useful in this game because just the ability to run it at pace, but towards the goal, and just the ability to finish. I mean, it doesn't matter where he is in the box. His finishing abilities probably far better than Maeda's, and his creative skills are far better than Maeda's as well. Having said that, just Maeda's pressing, they'll never have played against anybody like him in the championship for sure. I mean, he will be a player they just will not have come across that style of player. So yeah, I think on balance, I would probably go with Abada actually for this game. I would probably go with Iwata simply because, as I say, I think he can step into midfield. Mackay's not going to run away from Starfelt. Iwata can step forward. So yeah, I think that's the way I would personally go in terms of the matchups.
One worrying sign is that Kyogo has reportedly not trained with the team this week. He was just doing individual training, so he may or may not be fully fit. Given that he played the Scottish League Cup final last year on one leg, I would be surprised if a little minor tweak is probably going to hold him back from this game. I think he's probably going to start this game, but theoretically, if he is out, uh, have we seen enough in O to get into the starting lineup to be the main man to run the line for Celtic? Now, I will say there have been criticisms of his performances in the last number of weeks, but in a matter of sort of George Giacomakis, he scored 5 goals in 6 appearances now for Celtic, I think is the correct numbers. So, I mean, he's doing his job in terms of the goals. So, James, I guess it's the other stuff that we need to talk about.
Yeah, I
Or do
mean,
we?
well, I think there's a longer term conversation to be had, which we started in prior weeks and months about, his style of play relative to kind of the Kyogo nature of the striker position at Celtic. And he's been more like Giacomakis in the sense that he's been on the ball a little more, and that hasn't been all that productive when he has been, giving the ball away, that kind of thing. But as far as in the box kind of finishing, he's, I think it's the old confirmation bias issue. If somebody misses a big chance early, then in their career, then he's can be labeled by some as a bad finisher, that kind of thing, or missing a sitter can become an entrenched narrative pretty quick. So yeah, I what I've seen out of him so far, I think is pretty encouraging, particularly given his age. And again, this type of game, the way I would suspect that it's going to play out, I think he's fine. I mean, in that, him being in the box and a little bit bigger and more physical against Inverness, I think, isn't necessarily such a bad thing because, again, unless they're insane, they're not going to be pushing out a lot and creating a lot of space in behind where Kyogo would hammer them. So yeah, I obviously prefer Kyogo and hope he makes it, but I wouldn't be alarmed if he's not able to.
Mm. Is it as much as his relationship with the wingers, Alan, as it is his own individual ability? Because, like, we've spoken time after time this year about Kyogo and how much, or how little, I should say, he's getting on the ball, and how he's basically invisible up until the point where the ball's in the box and then he comes to life. Whereas O is very different. He's very all action. He drops deep to get the ball. He even drops wide to get the ball. Is there probably a sense that maybe he's trying to do too much and he's actually getting in the way of the likes of Jota or Abad or Maeda, whoever they are? He's almost operating in their space, not intentionally, but just out of, determination to be on the ball as much as possible.
Well, he's certainly, it's not stopping him doing his core job because he's averaging nearly, well, just over 7.5 touches in the box per 90 minutes. He's getting nearly 4 shots away per 90 minutes, and his XG is just under 1. So that all suggests, now again, health warning, he's generally played at the back end of the season against the lesser teams. He's coming on as a sub when the games are often won, but not always. So bear that in mind, and in that sense, he's actually replicated Giacomakis almost perfectly. Although I think he's a better technical footballer than Giacomakis, but not as experienced. And maybe not quite as instinctive a finisher as Giacomakis was, but he's young. He's younger as well. And he's a bit more mobile, I would say. So I think he's a perfect replacement in that respect, but with a higher ceiling in terms of where he might get to. And I think you can't say it's been anything but a very promising start, even though it's limited minutes. So if he's clearly in good form as well, so clearly if he does start, I wouldn't be that worried. I don't want us to be, putting a sort of 75% fit Kyogo on the pitch. I don't think that's fair. And I don't think we need to. I think we should show faith in I think he's earned the right to start if he's the 100% fit striker. Whether Kyogo's fit enough to come on, I don't know, but I wouldn't have any qualms about it, and especially given the level of opposition. If O can't be producing against Inverness, then why have we bought the guy? In all honesty, but there's been nothing in what we've seen so far that to suggest that he wouldn't. he wouldn't be highly
Yeah.
effective actually in that role.
Yeah.
So I'm not too worried. I would be more worried if we were playing one of the top six for sure, but against this level of opposition, with all due respect, I think O would do a fine job.
Well, there is one thing that Celtic can't offer. Oh, that the MLS can offer George Giacomakis, and that's a golden pin for the player who showed the most determination on the pitch. I don't know if you've seen that video. Giacomakis was like either the man of the match or the player of the game or the player who showed the most heart on the pitch, and they gave him a hammer to hammer in like a golden pin into something.
It's a
I
spike,
don't
Enda. It's a
spike. Oh,
spike.
sorry, a
How
golden
dare you?
spike. Is a spike
How
different
old
to a
is this
pin?
tradition, James?
I have no idea. I don't know anything about Atlanta's team, but yeah, because I did see the video. It looked like a railroad spike, like a
Okay.
no idea what
I
that.
Yeah, I'll never understand American soccer culture. I just don't. I don't understand it. It's so bizarre. But I won't give you too much ribbon for that. So I mean, look, it's difficult to preview these types of games because of the disparity in the level of the opposition. So Alan, let's play a small game before we finish up the podcast. What is the worst case scenario for you in terms of what Celtic do at the weekend versus what Inverness might do? Because that's how Celtic will probably plan it a little bit differently. But in terms of the best way to approach this game, what's worst case scenario for you to happen on the pitch, and how do Celtic get out of it?
It's a slow tempo. I mean, that's the easiest to defend against. If you're not moving a deep block around, if you're not shifting players, if you're not making them think about what runs you're making, then you're making it easy for them to defend. So that's generally the road to these games being difficult, is being careless about your play, but also just playing it far too slow a tempo. There's no need for Celtic to do that. I mean, you asked about the weather. It's going to be glorious in Glasgow for the next week. Glorious sunshine every day. So
Taps off weather.
yeah, it'll be hammed in the sun. Yeah, absolutely. I shall have my tap off when in the crowd for sure. So
Are you going to the
yeah,
game? Do you get a ticket?
I am. Yes, yeah, I am.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah. So yeah, I shall give you a wave.
Yeah, I let nobody tell
I'm not
me
going to
that
take
this
my tap off.
podcast is
I'll have
just
to say.
full of armchair warriors. Alan's going to the game, so
Oh yeah,
uh,
we'll be
don't
there.
come
We'll
at
be
us in
there.
the
Looking
comments.
forward
So,
to it.
that'll
Yeah.
be brilliant then.
I'm going to be putting some sun cream on actually because I don't want to
Yeah.
get. It's a long day to be out in the sun all day.
So this is your last game since the derby, isn't it?
Well,
Last year,
yeah,
was
it's
it?
been difficult this season because I've not been for various reasons bore people with and not been able to go up. So yeah, it's been a while. So yeah, looking forward to it.
So who are you looking forward to seeing then this season in the flesh? Because it's so different seeing these players play on the pitch
Yeah,
rather than watching them on the TV screen. So
yeah, no, definitely. Well, I want to see Kyogo, obviously. I mean, because actually, the last game I was at, Kyogo wasn't fit, so Giacomakis played. So I really want to see him, really, more than anything. So I hope he is fit. But yeah, just to see how his ground speed, because you don't really appreciate players' speed until you see them properly. Looking forward to seeing Maeda, having just said that I don't think I'd play Abada instead. It would be nice to see Maeda. So that, yeah, I think those two for sure. Just to really, because the speed scares the hell out of teams. It's the thing you can't defend absolutely against. So and that's the thing in the flesh that you don't really appreciate. And just the movement. I mean, Kyogo's movement off the ball. We obviously watching games on TV, you miss a lot of the moves that get made. So really looking forward to seeing that. Depending on which seat I'm on, because obviously Hampden's notorious for not having great sight lines. The seats are a bit shallow and a bit low a lot of the time. So the other end of the pitch can seem an awful long way away.
yeah, I missed Kyogo last time I was at a game too, which is annoying. But yeah, well, I hope you enjoy that. James, you'll be watching on the TV. What's the worst case scenario for Celtic?
I mean, it's a combination of a bad finishing day with their keeper having a good day and us getting to extra time. And then, one of those games where you have 25, 30 shots and can't score. I mean, that's the recipe for this kind of matchup where you get, really nervous and then people start pressing and To me, that's like the base case nervy situation. There's always obviously the outliers. I mean, theoretically, because they are a relatively as Alan says, it seems like they're a functioning counterattacking team. And if, wouldn't be crazy if we got sucked in too deep in attack because we're pushing to score, and then just out of something fluky, they get, almost like a breakaway. Or one of our center backs trips and fall. You know what I mean? Like there's plenty of ways that kind of thing can happen. And guys get wrong sided, and you get a red card or something crazy like that. I mean that's. But even a red wouldn't. I think 10 versus 11, we're probably still fine against them. So yeah, it's just one of those things where, as the game, if we don't score early, then it just starts getting more and more nervous and more nervous, and the crowd gets nervous, and that's the recipe for these games to be a misery. So let's just hope we score 1 or 2 early, and it can turn into some fun.
Yeah, fingers crossed. So we'll wrap the podcast there. But before, of course, it is tradition for me to ask you your predictions for the game and not get a straight answer. So, Alan, I'll let you go first, not telling me what your prediction actually is.
Yes. Well, I don't want to be. Yeah, listen. They're going to give it. It's the game of their lives, right? So Inverness is going to give it absolutely everything. You got to respect that. It isn't going to be as easy as the league position suggests, but I still think Celtic should come out maybe 3-0. I'll say.
James?
Yeah, what popped into my head was 4-0. So, but I suspect, it's more likely to be first half that's, maybe a little tough. To Alan's point, I mean, they're going to run around like lunatics until they run out of gas. So, yeah, I don't think it'll be necessarily that easy, at least for the first half hour. But in the second half, you would think it could turn ugly for them.
I'm going to go 3-0, and I'm going to have my editing gear ready to go to snip all of this out and take it, wipe the whole entirety of this segment off the internet for when we go to penalties with Inverness and it comes down to the last kick and Joe Hart hits the crossbar or something.
And we're all screaming for Postecoglou to get sacked.
Yeah.
And everything that he says comes true.
And then he leaves. And then he leaves next week. And then he leaves next week. I think that of all the things, none of you has touched on what the real worst case scenario is. The worst case scenario is that Celtic lose this game and Ange fecks off after it gets announced.
And then we welcome Roy Keane as our new manager.
In the same form as Neil Lennon getting offered the job in the shower, Ange accepts the job in the shower for the Spurs. So no, that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. On that note, we will wrap the podcast up. Don't forget that we do have a Kieran Maguire chat in the bank, so that's going to be coming out very shortly, probably next week, depending on the Ange news. We'll have to wait and see who Tottenham's manager is, because that's going to be an emergency podcast if it turns out to be Ange Postecoglou. But until then, we will chat to you next week. Alan, enjoy the game. Enjoy the sunshine in Hampden Park.
Have fun, Alan.
And we shall chat to you all next week. Until then, good luck.